Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Ben, and this is the 2024 Guild Polara Night Edition. Let's get into it. So I first played one of the new Guild Polaras at the NAMM show back in January, and I knew I wanted to get my hands on one long term, but I just really got busy doing a bunch of other reviews and my actual real job. So it wasn't until maybe late April that I finally picked one of these things up. The truth is I always find myself picking this guitar up to mess around with. It's just a lot of fun to play. And another thing, you don't really see a lot of the night editions getting broken down on YouTube. I've looked for other videos and there's some general stuff, but not a lot that really dives into it. So I thought maybe that would be fun to do because I think it's one of the more unique Polara releases of this latest release cycle. So first, a real quick bit of history. Guild was formed in New York in 1952. Now, upon their initial announcement to the public, and I'm paraphrasing here, they said, Guild is a new manufacturer of acoustic instruments and solid body electric guitars. However, they didn't release a single electric guitar until 1963, over 10 years later. Now, the first guitars they did release were the Thunderbird S200, the Jetstar S50, and the Polara S100. Wait a minute, that doesn't look anything like this. No, it doesn't. That's because everything was overhauled in 1970. But in 1963, the Thunderbird was its own model, but the Jetstar and the Polara were the same body, just the Polara had more features. For example, it had 2 pickups and 2 sets of controls, and my favorite feature, the built-in stand in the back. That's right, when's the last time you've seen anything like that? So in 1970, Guild overhauled the entire electric guitar line, and that's when the Polara took on the familiar shape that we see here today, which is no doubt inspired by a Gibson SG. They also dropped the Polara name entirely and just called it an S100. Then they had 2 other models, the S90 and the S50, which were less feature-rich versions of the S100. Something I thought was funny, I came across this S100 release a few years ago that had all these maple leaves or oak leaves carved into the top of it, and I thought kind of looked pretty ugly. Well, I come to find out this was an official released Guild guitar called the Guild S100 Standard Carved. Thought somebody just got bored and wanted their Polara to match their ovation. But yeah, the initial run ran to about 1978, and there was a few changes here and there along the way, but the general shape and design stayed the same. Now, Guild has re-released the Polara or the S100 a few times since its initial run. They had a US-made mid-90s run, then there was a mid-2000s Newark Street line of Polara models, and then this, the 2024 refresh of the Polara. Now, I chose to go with what I consider to be the most unique of the Polara releases. So my review will mostly focus on the Night Edition, but I will point out where it makes obvious deviations from the Standard and the Deluxe model. And I won't be talking about the Kim Thiel release because it's just so much different than any of these other Indonesian-made Polaras. Well, the Night Edition does come in at $549, but I have seen some of them floating around Reverb for about $450. I don't know if that's like an overstock sale or what. Now, just for reference, the Standard Edition is also $549, and the Deluxe Edition is $700. Now, the price difference between the Standard model and the Deluxe model makes sense. The Deluxe model has block inlays, it has 2 pickups, it's got 2 sets of controls, it's got different and better tuners, it's got a genuine stop bar, and while I think that the ferrules and the string through looks cooler, more material is just generally going to cost more money, right? Another thing that I've noticed is that none of the Standard editions, and including the Night Edition, have any see-through finishes. And that might indicate that the Deluxe models possibly have better looking wood because it's not hiding underneath a thick finish. Who knows? So why does this guitar, with only 1 pickup and 1 volume control, cost the same amount as the Standard model? Well, let's get into it and see. Well, as is pretty standard with the low budget guitars these days, you don't get a gig bag or a case. Instead, you get this cardboard box with this carefully designed cardboard cutouts to keep the guitar safe during shipping. There is a canvas goodie bag though, and inside that you get the owner's manual, the old safety and compliance manual, an instruction guide on adjusting the truss rod, which is actually a useful bit of information if you're a new guitarist. You get a truss rod hex wrench, a set of stickers, and lastly, a couple medium guitar picks. I gotta say, the inclusion of guitar picks is so obvious and so awesome. I think every guitar should just come with a few guitar picks. In fact, I think there's just a few things every guitar should come with, no matter what the price is. A strap, guitar picks, a guide on how to adjust it, and the few tools that you do need to do those actual adjustments. Well, the Polara looks heavily inspired by the SG. There's absolutely no denying it. And as much research as I did into this, I couldn't find any official reason or anybody on record saying why the new Polara redesign pretty much copied the SG. The most popular theory that I've seen is that sales were starting to slow down for Guild. So they copied the hugely successful Gibson SG model, changed it up just a little bit, and threw it out in the market to see how it would do. Because surely somebody would see this guitar, and they'd say, hey, this is $50 less than this guitar. Why don't we just get that and see what it does? Sounds like a plausible theory anyway. One of my favorite comments that I've seen on the Polara is, it looks like somebody took a Gibson SG and left it next to the radiator overnight and it melted. And I agree. If you took a ice sculpture of an SG and let it sit there for a while and the features started to melt a little bit, I think it would look very similar to this. You'd take all the hard points and they'd just become these real soft corners. As far as this actual model, the Night Edition, what I like about it is very unique. It only comes in this finish, which they call tungsten. I think the first thing anybody's going to notice about it is that it has one single pickup and one volume control, and that's no doubt going to be a red flag for some people, but for me, I thought it fit the entire aesthetic of this guitar great. Another thing people are going to notice is that there's absolutely no fretboard markers. Probably another red flag for some people, but for me, I love guitars that don't have any fret markers. Actually, a few years ago, I had an acoustic guitar built for me, and the builder asked me, would you like white dots, black dots? What do you want on the fretboard? And I said, nothing. Really? Nothing? Nothing at all. I love the look. I think it's great. I do have a few friends, though, that are like, I don't know how you play that guitar. I could not play a guitar that doesn't have any fret markers. But is it really that much of a deal? How much are you looking at the fretboard when you're playing? I mean, aren't you more likely to just look at the side markers? I don't know. The Guild Polara has an all mahogany body. If you look at some of the deluxe models that have the translucent finishes, you can tell that the body is made out of 2 or 3 pieces. I'm inclined to think that that's probably what's going on with this guitar, but there's absolutely no way to find out because every square inch of it is covered in this finish. The body itself is a nice flat slab. There's a little bit of select carving like you find on an SG around the waist and the inside of the horns here. There is a bit more of a belly carve than you would find on an SG. These corners are very, very rounded. In fact, they're not really much of devil horns at all in the sense that they're softer compared to an SG, which has definitely more defined points to it. And then additionally, there's absolutely no carving going into it on the sides like you would find on a 60s SG or even on the current standard. You'll find a little bit of carving as everything converges towards this top point. Now for the backside of this guitar, what I really like is even though it's a flat slab, other than the belly carve, it runs straight into the neck. It's a very smooth transition. And that's something Guild had been working on since the early 70s with their Polara models. And I think that's a really nice touch because I see that little lip there, that little ledge, and I always wonder, why is that there on every single Gibson guitar? Why can't they just sand that clean or something? But I guess now it's part of the look and the legend. But for this guitar, you got something else here. And I really like that. I think it's a good touch. Well, we talked about this finish already. This is tungsten, but if you were to get the standard edition, you could get that in blue steel, voltage yellow, or phantom green. And if you were to get the deluxe model, you could get that in canyon dusk, cherry red, or vintage sunburst. Now the necks on all the Polara guitars are all mahogany, but what makes the Night Edition in particular different than both the standard or the deluxe models is where those guitars have a rosewood fretboard, the Night Edition gets an all ebony fretboard. Super cool, and I imagine that's for one because they needed to justify the price increase, but also what neck material are you going to get that's as dark as this body, the dark look that they're going for. I mean, maybe you could get rich light, but personally I'm glad they got real wood to use for this. For the profile of this neck, they call it a soft U shape, and I agree, it does feel like that. It's got a real steep side and then a gentle curve, and then it's almost flat on the bottom before it curves back up to the underside where your fingers are. Even though it's a relatively thin neck, the fact that it is sort of like a wide U shape gives it a little more heft, and it actually feels pretty good. I quite enjoy playing this guitar. Now for the measurements, I'm getting a 1.68 here on the nut, but for the first fret I'm getting a 0.81. Down here at the 12th fret, I'm getting a 0.91. So just about a 1/10 of an inch rise over the first 12, which is not a lot actually. And that kind of places it generally around where a slim taper neck would be if you're a Gibson player like I am. Something that is interesting is the official Guild documentation online says that this guitar has a 15.75 inch radius fretboard. And I've seen that on Sweetwater, I've seen it on Musician's Friend, I've seen it pretty much on every single website that I've looked at that's selling the Night Edition, whereas they would have the standard and the deluxe model at 12.5 inch radius. Well, I measured and measured and measured again this guitar, and I'm coming up with a 12.5 inch radius as well. which makes sense. I don't know why the Night Edition would get a flatter fretboard, and I'm guessing somebody made a typo on the official documents before they sent it out to all the resellers, and that's why everything just says that. But no, if you buy this guitar, it's going to have a 12.5-inch radius fretboard. Lastly, if you're curious about the angle back for the neck, well, you're going to get about a 2-degree angle back from the body, which is not as severe as on your standard Gibson SG, which is closer to about 4 degrees back. And then when we talk about the headstock angle back from the neck, that's about another 13 degrees, which is about what you get on an Epiphone, maybe just a little less. So in an effort to save my time and your time, I want to preface by saying every single thing I talk about in this section is a polished chrome on the standard and deluxe edition. Every single thing. So we'll start here at the bottom, we'll work our way up to the top, and then we'll flip it around if we need to. So starting at the very bottom, we get our black strap buttons. They're decent, but they're very small, so I wouldn't really trust them to be too secure, and you might want to look into some sort of strap lock situation or a locking strap. And then moving just up from there, we get to our jack, which is a black metal nut. That's awesome because for a while it seemed like they were doing plastic nuts, and those always strip out on cheap guitars. Next up from there, we get to the volume knob, and this is actually the only knob on this guitar. This is a black knurled knob, very similar to what you'd find on a Telecaster, of course, except this one is black. Moving over from there, we get to the ferrules, which is where the strings run through the body. On the back side, you've got a bit of a wider opening to accept the string ball end. Guild has said that this angled pattern mimics the hardtail design that you see on their deluxe models. Makes sense to me. One thing I do want to point out is that, at least on my model here, these ferrules are set far enough back so the strings don't rest on the corners of the Tune-o-matic bridge. It is close, but it doesn't actually touch it, which is a problem that I had with the LTD EC201 model that I reviewed 4 months ago. Is the strings were pretty much designed to go through the body and corner over the bridge, which is no bueno. Now let's talk about this bridge here. This is a Tune-o-matic bridge. It's completely unmarked, doesn't say anything on it, and it works very similarly to what you would see on a Gibson or Epiphone or pretty much any modern Tune-o-matic bridge, is that you've got these threaded posts that go into these threaded bushings that are sunk into the body, and those are your thumb wheels. You can adjust them with your thumbs to set the height, or you could actually alternatively stick a flathead screwdriver in the top side and twist it as well to adjust your height. And then of course you've got your 6 saddles here, which you would fine tune to get your intonation correct. And in case you're curious, it's actually the exact same post spacing as what you find on an Epiphone. So if you're ever looking for a replacement bridge and maybe you can't find one for this Guild model in particular, it seems to me that pretty much any replacement bridge for an Epiphone would fit on this guitar. Moving up from there, we get to our frets. Guild calls these narrow jumbo frets, which means they measure about 90 thousandths wide and 55 thousandths tall, which is more or less almost the same exact thing as a medium jumbo fret. I doubt you would feel much of a difference there. Moving up from there, we get to our dual action truss rod. That means you can adjust for forward bow or back bow, which I've seen that a lot lately. Nice touch. And then we move up to the tuners. These are what Guild calls the Guild RodeLink tuners. They don't say anything on them, and in case you're curious, they come in at 15:1 tuning ratio. Now the difference is on the deluxe model, you get the open gear Guild tuners, which they say are a lot better, and they come in at an 18:1 tuning ratio. I think that's it for hardware. No, there's one more thing that this guitar has that the others don't. That's actually a metal plate that says Guild underneath the clear coat, whereas the other guitars have a pearloid inlay. Pretty cool. I don't know if that justifies the markup of this model, but it's unique. For the electronics, we've got one pickup, one volume control, and one output jack, which is going to make this pretty simple. This is the Guild HB2 Plus pickup, which is modeled around the original oversized HB1 pickup that was in the original Polara models. The difference is this one is wound a little bit hotter. It's an Alnico 5 magnet, and it fits conventional sizing if you did ever want to swap it out. In case you're curious, Guild did work with Jason Lawler to recreate the original HB1 pickup in a more traditional size, and I think that's what you find in the Kim Thile releases of the Polara. But I said I wasn't going to talk about those. Now if we pop this thing open and look at the backside, well, it's pretty much devoid of any markings except for this pickup in particular says B. That could stand for bridge, and maybe if you have another Polara, you can tell me what the other pickup says. Does it also say B, or is it saying N for neck, or what's going on with these markings? Cavity looks pretty clean though. For the pickup reading, I'm getting a 13.71, which is a little bit hot. Now let's flip it over and look in the back cavity and see just what we've got going on there. Well, it's very simple. You've got a pickup that goes straight to the volume pot and then to the output jack. I will say one thing I'm a little bit disappointed about, which wouldn't apply to this model, but it would apply to the standard and the deluxe. On the original Polaras, some of them had a phase reversal switch here. You don't see that on any of the new re-releases. It's true that on the deluxe you get a whole host of coil tapping options for both pickups, but that's about it. For the other materials, we'll start at the bottom, we'll work our way all the way up to the top there and then flip it around as needed. That's a very small thing, but at the bottom of this guitar there is a little bit of felt between the strap button and the body. You also get that on the back side where the neck is. Moving up from there, we get to our pickup rings. These are black plastic, and that will match the same as the standard and the deluxe edition. All have black. Now this guitar does not have a pick guard, but if you were to get the standard or the deluxe edition, there is a single ply black pick guard right there where it normally would be. Now moving on to the fretboard, well obviously there's no inlays like we've talked about, but if you were to get the standard version, it would have dot inlays, and if you got the deluxe version, it would have block inlays. But what this guitar does have is the side fret markers, which is how I find what fret I'm on, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. And moving on from there, we get to the nut here. This is the Guild composite nut. On this guitar, it's black, but on the standard and the deluxe models, you're gonna find that it is a creamish kind of color. Then we get to our truss rod cover here. On this guitar, it is a single ply black truss rod cover. There's no fancy headstock inlay on this guitar or the standard models, but the deluxe model does have the infamous Guild Chesterfield logo. Now, I can't tell you what the Chesterfield logo stands for, but I can tell you why it's called the Chesterfield logo. And that's because if you look at this pack of cigarettes right here called Chesterfield cigarettes, it bears a striking resemblance to the Guild Chesterfield logo, and I think it just became known as the Chesterfield. And normally the Guild inlay would be pearloid or mother of pearl, but like I said earlier, the one on this guitar is metal. Lastly, we flip the guitar over and we've got a single ply black cavity cover. The Polara feels very comfortable in your hands, where an SG can feel a little bit rigid with its brutal angles. Everything on the Polara is rounded out. You've got your rounded off horns, the back of the neck here where it connects to the body is rounded. Even the neck itself is a little bit more of a rounded, soft U shape than what you would find on most SG neck styles. And I will say, after playing an SG for decades, it was easy to jump right over to this and get a nice feel for it. And I don't know if that would work the other way around. This guitar does feel very comfortable in your lap. It's got a little bit of an added belly carve over an SG, which is a welcome addition. Now we all know about the infamous Gibson SG neck dive issues. Well, let's see just how the Polara does. Let's find out together. Well, if you're bouncing around like an idiot like I just was, it does have a tendency to do a little bit of a neck dive, but I do think it's pretty easy to control. I've certainly played other guitars that were much worse. When it comes to the actual weight of this guitar, well, it comes in at 6.69 pounds, or just about 6 pounds 11 ounces, which I think makes it the lightest guitar I've reviewed yet. I think. Now I'm going to dive into the sound here and we'll see what we can come up with. One pickup, one volume control. Not really a lot you can do here, but I will mess around with the volume at different intensities and we'll see what kind of difference it makes. Well, there you have it, guys. That's my review of the Guild Polara Night Edition. Awesome guitar to play. I do think there's a ton of variance in the single pickup, which quite surprised me, but it is such a hot pickup that I think it's easy enough to roll it back and find all the tonal variances before it starts to really break up in your amplifier. 4 months ago, I reviewed the LTD EC201 guitar, and while that guitar was also kind of fun to play, I think that this HB2 Plus pickup is a lot better than that ceramic pickup that they had in that guitar. Additionally, the quality issues on this guitar seem to be a lot better than on that other budget guitar model. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think in the comments. If you like this video, consider liking it. If you liked the channel, consider subscribing, and I will talk to you guys next time.